If you've been to our conferences in the past, you know we do this thing called Connect Talks. And our next agenda item is, in fact, a Connect Talk. Modeled after the TED Talks, we bring together the Bay Area's most notable thinkers, doers, and innovators to do short presentations on a variety of topics. Our first Connect Talk today is with Contract Wrangler. That's Contract Wrangler, a San Mateo-based startup. Their platform ensures that contractual obligations are met, protects parties from unintentional breaches, and a lot more that we're going to learn about. So please join me in welcoming Contract Wrangler's founder and general counsel, Neil Peretz.
I'm excited to be here. I have worked for 4 different government agencies over the years of my career, kind of alternating between government and the private sector, although I should say it's been on the federal side of things. I was in the diplomatic service. I was in the SEC. I helped set up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and I was at the Department of Justice. So I'm going to talk really about the application of technology. In my case, we're more focused on the private sector these days, but it's equally applicable to government. So my aspirations for the talk today would be to talk about a problem that impacts both government and the private sector, talk about how we're using machine learning to try to address it, and some general concepts about machine learning that would help you think about, should I believe various machine learning and AI pitches that are coming to me, and then what are the implications for the government? We're not going to go into all the factoids here. The general takeaways here are a big challenge with contracts is people don't know what's in them, they don't know who owns them, and they don't know what actions to take. And that's really what we're going to go jump into today. I've got lots of different notable sources here that say, hey, you lose money or you have other problems when you don't know what's in your agreements, and happy to share those with you later. Getting back to the Bay Area, if you drive up the 101 freeway, you see a lot of these billboards up here. And really what is happening is essentially what I call the unbundling of the organization. It used to be you'd have someone in accounting do 12 different things. Now you've got 7 different software packages for them to use. So the result is we're ending up with less employees dedicated to certain tasks and then more external services. Now this is great in some ways. It tends to be efficient because some of these services over here might be experts at their topic. Maybe they're more cost effective or more responsive. They don't go to sleep. They're online. But there is a challenge, which is we tend to manage and control them differently. We used to have employees, you'd give them a performance review. Hey, how you doing? Work more on this, work less on that. You wander by. Nowadays, you can't really do that with these different service providers. Instead, what we have are these dotted lines, which essentially are contracts. So you've got this explosion of contracts with really every organization, because every time we sign up for these, we've got to sign up for, well, what's the service level you're going to provide me? What are the different deliverables you're going to give me? When are you going to get it done by? How am I going to pay you? When is it going to renew? And it's created some new stressors for organizations where you can't just wander down the hall and talk to someone about the status. And how do all these contracts get created? We all sit around the room and basically talk about what we want. Different requirements for different organizations, different requirements for different departments. It all gets written up in an agreement, and this is where we are 9 months later. The only criticism I've received of this slide is some people say, no, it's more like 3 months later. So I'm sure you've seen this before. The result of not knowing what's in all these agreements or not remembering, because maybe someone in your organization knew at one point in time, can be severe. And to give you one example, I don't know if any of you have been to Park City, Utah, famous skiing resort. Used to be family run. The family had run it for so long, they had a lease on the mountain for $150,000 a year to run it. So they tend to be making a lot of money these days. They missed their lease option renewal date. They forgot about it. They lost the mountain. So that is why Vail runs it now, because Vail showed up at 12:01 the next morning and plunked down over $100 million. Now, I know this is crazy. It's Utah. It wouldn't happen in the Bay Area. People would never miss anything in a contract, especially near here. Except occasionally it happens. And it costs $6 million, and people lose their job and things like that when you miss notice dates or other provisions in your contract. So Basically, the point being, if you go to court on contracts, the court tends to say, well, the contract matters, and you bargained for a certain way to do things, and we expect you to do that, and otherwise you pay for it. I've got many other examples. I thought a closer to home one might be interesting, but you can read about a $1 billion merger that fell apart when people forgot to send a notice, et cetera. Getting back to your own organization, I give you sensational examples. Day to day, this stuff happens all the time. And you've got, hey, when can I go change this supplier? What is so-and-so supposed to do by a certain date or time? Basically, everyone who has an external relationship has contracts, and it talks about the contours of your relationship every day. If you want to go deliver, you're dependent upon people you have contracts with. So how do you solve this problem? I came at solving this problem from someone who is working as a general counsel at a company. That's where I faced it the most, although I faced it as a government attorney as well. I'd have my own clients as a DOJ attorney come to me and say, hey, I've got a problem with so-and-so that I have a relationship with. And I'd say, well, how did you get into this situation? And the long tail would begin. Well, Fred signed this, but Fred's not here anymore. And then Susie looked at it, but then Susie got assigned to something else, on and on. People don't know the answer to these questions. And I said, well, how do you normally keep track of these obligations? The answer is really twofold. One is what I call store and pray. We stick all these in a, it could be a paper box, it could be a digital box, and we hope it doesn't come up on our watch. And that can be successful sometimes for you, not for your organization. And the other choice is, well, we could read them all. And the challenge is, you see these things on the internet where they ask you, are you a human? How can I tell? I'm going to give you a picture here, and you can tell me if it's a kitty cat or a donut. That works great for differentiating kitty cats and donuts. It doesn't work well for contracts. I'd be less excited to ask these people, is this a mutual or one-way indemnification clause? So you basically need skilled professionals. They tend to be attorneys, paralegals. They tend to be expensive. So this is the problem that we set out to solve at Contract Wrangler. To give you the context for why I'm talking about the topic, you start with this, and how do you end up with, getting back to the beginning, you want to have visibility, you want to have ownership, you want to have actions. How do you go from your big pile to that? What we're doing is people are dragging their contracts in digitally into our system. OCR stands for optical character recognition. Simply it means I have an image, I pull out the text of it. We don't know what the text means, but we've gone from an image to at least a bunch of letters that we could then interpret. The most challenging thing we're doing is we're trying to train machines to actually read contracts and find the key business details in them. So then they can remind you. And I'll tell you a little bit about the machine learning. You'll notice the next step here is attorney QC. Machine learning is nowhere near the state that you can just let the machines do this for you by themselves. You need human experts, in our case attorneys, to constantly QC quality control and train the machines and go over and over again in a loop. And I thought it might be interesting to you if you keep hearing about machine learning, think about, well, why can't machines just do this out of the box? Or how should I think about machine learning? And whether it's good enough to solve a particular problem that I'm interested in. So let me give you a snapshot of where you are. How do you say effective date in a contract? Could we just sit here and imagine all the ways to say it? Probably not. There's hundreds or thousands of different ways to say it. Is it the inauguration date, the origination date, the beginning date? Basically, the more varieties you have of how something can be described, the more training, the more QC you need for the machine learning. It's not a question of whether you have a quantum computer or a faster processor or more software code. It is training. It is experience. And think about this firsthand. If you've got a junior person working for you, and they see one particular type of agreement that your government organization works on, do they know everything about all those types of relationships? No. They need to be trained. They develop experience over time. It is the same thing with machine learning. And I'm giving you just my limited context here. You almost always want to ask this. Now, I'll give you an easy example. Let's talk about expiration dates. Is it the expiration date? Is it the 3rd anniversary of the 2nd month after the maturity date? Or could it be when Jupiter aligns with Mars, moon is in the southern sky, et cetera? Lots of different ways to say things. You want to think about machine learning. Think about varieties. We have human experts in the loop constantly checking and improving this. The result, though, we get is when we have the information, there's great benefits to an organization. you can figure out what is my baseline, what do I typically contract for, what are my normal payment terms, what other warranties do I typically get from people. The next step is to say, hey, you've got something coming up pretty soon. Maybe you've got an auto renewal. Maybe you want to go bid that thing out and get the best deal for your constituents. And then the next thing is take actions. So I discovered something in an agreement. In our system, you can actually trigger a workflow. Oh, I noted that this entity over here is supposed to have insurance and cover us so we don't get sued. Who's going to check on that? Oh, great, now I can assign it to someone. So before you had finger pointing this way and that way, now you find the insight, you can actually go assign it to people, and that's really what we've built. And it's important to think about that generally. You'll have people talk about insights. How do you take actions based on those? Because an insight left in a closet reminds me of that Dream Deferred poem by Langston Hughes. We are doing this right now with commercial clients. We don't know very much about helping governments from a commercial perspective, even though I've worked for them. So I'm going to be learning more today here. We've tended to work with financial institutions. We've tended to work with tech companies in a variety of different problems. Either they're ways that they can increase their revenue, they're ways that they can decrease their risk, they're ways that they can lower their costs. I gave some initial thought to what does this all mean for government? How would I think about interpreting this if I was sitting in your shoes in the audience? And I think there's a few different elements. You probably hear about digital transformation quite often. If you've got external relationships, your contract's really the first place to think about how do I actually engage in digital transformation, because my contract's really the guidelines for that. In my situation, what I've talked about is how do I interpret things that I have right now? And generally, this is an overall lens to think about interpreting technology. Is it technology that's going to help me do something different in the future? Or can it help me right now with something that I have right now and have an impact immediately? There's really a big difference between the two. What you'll find is if you could start with something that would help you with your situation right now, that would have a bigger impact than just changing your future behavior. And generally, changing behaviors are hard. Accountability, that's what we focus on. I'm sure it's what you all focus on in your organizations because you are a public trust. Institutional knowledge, people come and go. And I think they come and go more frequently than ever before in these organizations. If you're able to take your relationships, which otherwise resided in people's head, and you can start putting those in a digital system and actually figure them out, then you've actually prepared for future folks. And last thing, if you want to think about Silicon Valley economics, what can we do to plan for the future, to keep Silicon Valley ahead? It's think about this training concept again. And what does it mean to be an expert and the best at this? It actually means you're investing in building up these data sets and this knowledge that help folks. And I know the prior talk there was about self-driving cars that was mentioned as well. Same thing. A ton of training goes into all of that. So if you want to think about your workforce development, how do we keep Silicon Valley in the lead? It's not just having programmers at this point in time. It's actually starting to coerce all these other experts in, be they drivers or lawyers, and train systems, because that's what gives people an advantage. I'm happy to take questions.
Neil, what's your elevator pitch?
It depends who I'm talking to. So if it's someone who is focused on making money, I'd say, hey, you're not making enough money because you're forgetting what's in your existing relationships with your clients, when you should call them and upsell them, et cetera. To give you a practical example of this, I have a few bank accounts for the company. I talked to my own account executive at the bank. I said, do you actually know the terms of my company with your bank? He says, no, I just have your data in Salesforce. I know when to call you up every X many months. I said, wouldn't you be a better banker? Wouldn't you be more helpful to me if you actually knew the contours of my relationship with you? Oh, that'd be amazing if I knew what interest rate you had or whether you were on LIBOR or not, because LIBOR is going away, for example. Or alternatively, if you're talking to a supplier person, hey, wouldn't you save money or get a better arrangement or have a more flexible organization if you could bid out stuff before it auto-renewed and you're stuck?
Thank you. I am just curious if you have thought about how to use Contract Wrangler in the world of education to help us look at how to monitor and measure implementation of projects so that we can better determine the return on investment.
We've done some in terms of identifying milestones in agreements and then tracking whether those are done. And then if you did this with a whole bunch of agreements, you could actually have a baseline and say, well, who's performing and who's not. So I think that would probably be the best way. Otherwise, education, of course, has a lot of inputs and outputs and external relationships, so you'd get the best out of those. I think I got
I'm next.
last question, I guess.
How do you foresee your company transitioning to having a product or service for individuals? Because individuals as well as businesses have so many contracts,
Yep.
and the more digital we become, the stat in the last speakers in Ms. Dearborn's was 25 devices per
Yep.
person. So what do you see as the future for that? Because I could use you in my life right now.
Yeah, I would love to. My investors weren't as excited for me to start focusing on individuals, but certainly that would be a dream. And I think it would actually be probably an easier problem in some ways because lots of individuals sign up for the same service. So how many people have a Verizon contract, and could we parse that out? So it's an aspiration. It's a question of when we get the breathing room to go do it. Thanks. I've got my red sign up there. I don't know who to hand this to. Thank you.